10th to order. Thank you for braving the snowstorm to be here today. We do have Senator Gossage, Senator Dietrich, and Senator Pittman online, so they will be able to participate if needed. Our agenda today is a hearing on House Bill 2110. David, can you give us an overview, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. House Bill 2110, as amended by the House Committee, would require the state health care benefits program to implement coverage for the diagnosis and prescribed treatment of pediatric acute onset neuropsychiatric syndrome, or PANS, and pediatric autoimmune neuropsychiatric disorders associated with streptococcal infections, or PANDAS, beginning in plan year 2023, pursuant to the test track statute, KSA 40-2249A, on or before March 1st of 2024, the State Employees Health Care Commission is required to submit a report regarding the mandated coverage for PANS and PANDAS to the President of the Senate and the Speaker of the House of Representatives, that was provided during plan year 2023. The report would contain the impact of the mandated coverage has had on the state health care benefits program, data on the utilization of coverage for PANS and PANDAS and the cost of that coverage, and a recommendation of whether such mandated coverage should continue for the state health care benefits program or whether additional data is required. And then at the next legislative session following receipt of the report, the legislature may consider whether or not to include require PANS and PANDAS coverage to be mandated for health insurance plans on or after July 1 of 2025. The House Insurance and Pensions Committee amended the bill to update the dates by 1 year since this bill was originally introduced in the 2021 session. The reference was originally to plan year 2022 for the state employees health benefits plan. Since this is a carryover bill, we're already in plan year 2022. We just moved that out, so it would actually be the study and the test track would start in 2023. The House did pass HB 2110 by a vote of 113 to 8 on February 23rd of 2022, and I can stand for any questions.
David, thank you very much. Did you go to med school before law school? Your pronunciation of that was pretty good.
I've had a little practice on it.
Any questions for David? Seeing none, thank you very much. We will now turn our attentions to the proponents. First up is Representative John Eppley. Welcome to the Senate.
Thank you very much, Chairman Longbine, and the Hale and Hardy members that are here today and those that are on WebEx. I really do thank you for this opportunity to give you an update on, to give Senate Financial Institutions and Insurance an update on this bill. Again, it's got a long name, and it, if you can pronounce it after we get done with this testimony, we'll give you an honorary MD degree, I guess. It's pediatric autoimmune neuropsychiatric syndrome, or pediatric autoimmune neuropsychiatric disorder associated with streptococcal infection, and therein lies about 17 syllables. But it's a lot more than that. It's a very real diagnosis that affects children in the state of Kansas. This is not some made-up diagnosis. It's a very bona fide diagnosis, and while it's been around about 10 years, it's really become much better understood in health circles in about the last 4 years. For the experts that treat this, and there are experts that treat this in the United States, the treatments are varied and wide, but they boil down to steroids, antibiotic cocktails, counseling, and in lots of situations when other treatments have not worked, immune globulin is used. This almost always works and is very effective in the treatment of these disorders. This disease has a spectral disorder in that it presents typically with the most notable thing is it's acute in onset. It's very sudden. You put your child to bed at night, one night, and they wake up the next morning and they have bizarre neuropsychiatric manifestations. And basically, if any of you know what the word encephalitis means, it's inflammation of the frontal temporal part of the brain that involves behavior and processing, and it becomes devastating. These children will develop profound obsessive compulsive disorders. They will have repetitive behaviors. They'll have paranoid ideations, and it becomes disruptive, and it can become permanent, and it can change their life. The long-term trajectory of this disorder can cause permanent neuropsychiatric disorders with these children. For years, these children were subjected to counseling and to other treatments until we learned that immune globulin is really the trigger that reverses this and can actually stabilize this disease and put these children in a far better place. You'll hear this from some of the other testimonies behind me that are coming up. Again, David did a wonderful job of explaining to you. We've been working at this for 4 years. I presented it first in House Health, and then House Health took it to an interim to really study to see if it was indeed legit. We felt like it was indeed very legit and needed to go forward. It was referred to then to House Insurance, where it's traversed its way, and with the help of research, we were able to produce then a cost report as outlined in statute called the Segal study. Some of you, I hope, had a chance to look at it. If you didn't, I want to make sure you understand that the impact taking it through the state employee health plan is negligible or minimal. It would be 0.06 to 0.19% fee increase or increase on premiums to the state employee health plan recipients. So the cost is negligible. There's no cost to the state, and it would be borne by the state employee health plan. Again, there is an ICD-10 code attached to it, so that tells you right there that this is a bona fide diagnosis that medicine does ascribe to and does believe that these treatments are available and should be made available to the public as a whole. But again, part of the process, part of this journey is to take it through the state employee health plan, and that is what this bill is requesting. That is the next step in statute as outlined in Kansas law, and that's what we're here is to ask for a test track through the state employee health plan now that we've done the cost report. So I appreciate the capacity to speak on behalf of this bill today, and we'll be happy to answer questions at the appropriate time, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Committee, are there questions? Senator Hildebrand.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Eppley, for those of us that are not in the doctorate field or did not sleep at a Holiday Inn Express, could you explain to the committee what an immunoglobulin is, what exactly that does and what it is?
Well, so an immune globulin is a protein-based substance that can impart antibodies and also other nourishing things to the immune system when there's an immune defect. So it's a protein cascade of molecules that is used in fighting immune disorders.
Thank you.
Committee, additional questions?
Mr. Chair, one.
Yes, Senator Pittman.
Thank you. Representative Eppley, thank you. Dr. Eppley, appreciate your testimony always. Can you tell me, so we're only doing this for the state employee health plan, and I'm probably ignorant on this, but why wouldn't we try and put that into, kind of a mandate across all insurance plans for this condition?
Thank you very much, Senator, for that question. And to address that, again, it's strictly outlined in statutes that we are required to go through a test track first in the state employee health plan. That is certainly our ultimate goal, Senator, is to expand this to insurance as a whole, which would still only impact slightly more than 50% of young children in the state of Kansas. But we have to go through the appropriate steps, and this is the next step in that progression.
Thank you.
Committee, additional questions? I see none. Thank you, Dr. Eppley.
Thank you, Chairman.
We'll now turn our attention to Tara Richardson, a Kansas doctor. Tara, are you with us today?
Yes, can you hear me?
We can.
Okay, well, thank you for having us. I'm going to try to share my screen here if that's okay.
We have you.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm Dr. Tara Richardson. I'm a general psychiatrist. I live in Andover and I see patients kind of all over the state. I went to KU for medical school and also residency. And my daughter actually came down with PANS in October of 2019 when she was 5 years old. And she had a very textbook case with that overnight change that Dr. Eppley described. And so after that, there's very few doctors in the area, at least, who treat. And so I completed an additional fellowship to learn everything I could about how to treat this condition. And so I'm going to talk about PANS a little bit more and about our case and why we feel this bill is so important. Are you able to see my screen?
We can, yes.
Okay. So like Dr. Eppley mentioned, that PANS is an acute lightning-like onset of these symptoms, and this is what the diagnostic criteria are. So you'll typically have obsessive compulsive disorder where you have recurrent thoughts that are intrusive or obsessions, and then you have actions designed to make those thoughts go away. And maybe people are familiar with hand washing is one that's very common. And severely restricted food intake. So obviously this can become pretty dangerous. You also have to have at least 2 of these 7 other symptoms listed here with anxiety, emotional lability, aggression, behavioral or developmental regression, deterioration of school skills, changes to your sensory input, or somatic signs like a lot of times urinary frequency and incontinence are common. And this is once everything else has been ruled out, and there's still not a reason for this. This is when PANS is diagnosed. Now, most of these kids will have most of these symptoms, though not all of them. There actually is not an age requirement for PANS. It's tend to be thought of as a childhood illness, but older people can suffer from this as well. The peak age of onset is 4 to 9 years old. So there's frequently a family history of autoimmune conditions, and we think that, you know, it's in that class. Here are some of the neurological symptoms that I mentioned. This is handwriting and drawing examples at baseline, and then during what we call a flare or an episode. So you can see on the left, there's a pretty big change. And this is something that would obviously not happen if a child was just suffering from anxiety or OCD by themselves. Over here is actually after treatment with IVIG, which, you know, the bill addresses. Here's another one at baseline and then during a flare. So you can see that the brain function is obviously being pretty significantly affected. And that's just something objective that people can see. So we think that it's basically caused by a misdirected immune response, where instead of the virus or bacteria that is actually affecting the body responds and attacks a place in the brain called the basal ganglia. And the basal ganglia is involved in attention, executive functioning, emotions, and also movement. So that's where that cluster of symptoms comes from. A lot of these children actually have an episodic course, so it will get better and then get worse for a time. So 65% of children, that's the course. The problem is that with each episode, there can be some residual damage. And so even their baseline may not be back to where it was previously after each episode. So if you have concurrent episodes that are not treated or are not treated appropriately, you'll have some cumulative damage over time where these symptoms can become chronic and permanent. So the treatment, like Dr. Eppley mentioned, is really 3-pronged. If there's some type of infection that's present, obviously we want to use antibiotics to treat that. Also, the immunomodulatory treatments he mentioned are steroids, anti-inflammatories such as ibuprofen or naproxen, pretty, cheap, effective medications there that we commonly use. And then psychiatric medications are really just used as symptom relief. And so if you were to treat this solely with psychiatric care, that would not be adequate. So how do we help these kids? Really, one of the huge barriers we face is timely diagnosis. And so I think that's improving, especially after COVID. We, have a much better understanding of how viruses and bacteria can affect the brain, and that's become a more mainstream understanding. But physician education is huge. And then getting the appropriate treatment as soon as possible is very important. And this is my daughter who got sick. That's around the time she got sick. She was fully functioning and healthy, and she woke up one morning in October, and she basically was afraid to eat at all because she believed all the food was contaminated. And she had the worst case of obsessive compulsive disorder I've ever seen as a psychiatrist. So it was a struggle for even us to get a diagnosis, because we were told it was probably anxiety. It was probably maybe just straight OCD, that she had a UTI. So I talked to maybe about 12 different doctors because none of this was making sense to me. And I wasn't sure what it was, but I knew what it was not at the time. Here's a video of her in the hospital, and you can see at the end, you can see some of the baby talk, the regression, the motor movements, but also how terrified she is when I try to get her to take a drink of water. So she's actually doing really well now. It did take about 6 months for a full recovery, but she hasn't had any further major episodes. And our treatment was, by the established treatment protocol that exists, it was anti-inflammatory and steroids. We were fortunate that she did not need IVIG, and I think that was a big factor in this was her getting a diagnosis relatively quickly. It was about a week after she first presented with symptoms. And so, she's doing really well. We never had to use psychiatric medications or anything like that. But I'm happy to answer any questions about my experience. I do treat a handful of children with this. Now, if it's a mild to moderate case, I tend to refer severe cases to specialty centers when possible, or happy to answer questions about our experience also.
Dr. Richardson, thank you very much. Are you able to stay with us for a while?
Yes.
Okay. What I would prefer to do, committee, is we'll take proponent testimony when we finish. I want to make sure we have people who have driven in. I want to make sure that they get an opportunity to testify. So we will now turn our attention to Shannon Wright from Topeka, Kansas. Welcome, Shannon.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, committee members. I'm so grateful today to be here. I'm just kind of overwhelmed with that right now. I just want to tell you that our story is that my own child had an onset on September 13th, 2011, and she experienced a sudden change of behavior, cognitive and overall functioning in the school setting and at home. And so she was normally a sweet-natured, imaginative, easy, eager to please daughter, and so she became increasingly unresponsive much of the time. She lost her ability to maintain her concentration, complete her assignments. She couldn't remember basic information like her birthday. She began crying and hiding under desks. She would pace back and forth, making continual random and strange comments. She had sudden mood changes, became violent and a flight risk, and it was not unusual for her to be awake and agitated until 3 or 4 in the morning. So long story short, after seeing many doctors, running tests, trialing various psych medications, we finally found a doctor who identified that my daughter was experiencing an autoimmune issue triggered by strep or another kind of infectious agent. He prescribed IVIG and her body began to heal, bringing her back to us and back to normal. Not quite her baseline where she was, but she became a functioning student in school and was able to return to the general education classroom by the end of the summer. I think over the years, I would estimate that our family has paid out of pocket $30,000 for treatment, and I do think that is it could be much larger than that, actually. That put her pandas in remission. When she was ill, it was recommended to us that she be placed in a long-term hospitalization and that her behavior stressed the school system by pulling other supports from other children. At the time, her future looked very bleak, and it was possible she would have qualified for Social Security. I know that my husband and I could not have continued working full-time with the amount of behaviors and symptoms that she was having. If we had not pursued IVIG for her and traveled to Chicago to get that treatment, the cost to Kansas would have quickly exceeded $30,000 as she had qualified for the SED waiver. And so, which is severe emotional disturbance, and through the mental health clinic. So she had attendant care, case management, psychiatric services. And so we began that in April, and I took her off in September because she had recovered. And so she only had the medical card for 4 months. But I was curious and asked the mental health clinic, like, about all the services that she'd been getting and the cost of that, and it was $10,000, which at the time was the cost of an IVIG treatment, which actually helped her in her healing. So thank you so much for hearing us today. You're going to hear from Mason today, and he is a patient actually a recovered child with pandas, and we also have Meredith here, and she's willing to speak with you after this committee hearing if you would like. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We will now turn our attention to Mason Lowe. Mason, are you with us?
Yes, I am. Can you all hear me?
Please go ahead.
Okay. So, my name is Mason Lowe. I'm from Wellington. Before I begin, I have a challenge for you all. So, close your eyes. Imagine yourself in biology class. There is a test over cell division today, and you're pretty nervous about it. You haven't been able to sleep the whole week because of how worked up you are about it. You're handed your test, and you just absolutely cannot concentrate because some invisible force is telling you to tense up your neck so hard that it gets sore. You look up at the clock and see that only 10 minutes remain in class. You go back to working on that test, but again, that invisible force returns. This time it directs your attention to the misaligned desks in front of you, and all you can think about is how those desks need to be straightened up. The bell rings and the teacher collects your half-finished test. Now open your eyes and imagine living in that world every day. It may be hard for you to picture, but the situation described above highlights just barely scratches the surface of the struggles I have faced my entire life. The biggest challenge I've ever overcome is one that will never go away. I have pediatric autoimmune neuropsychiatric disorder associated with strep pandas, and some days it truly drives me insane. So, its symptoms, as previously mentioned, include tics, anxiety, OCD, sleep issues, and a whole host of other problems. Personally, my worst symptoms were tics and OCD. In fact, my OCD was so debilitating that for years I could not function unless I did everything in groups of 4. If I ever tapped on anything with my hands, it had to be 4 times. I had to have the TV and radio volumes at multiples of 4 at all times, and I even had to count the syllables in my sentences and add words until they added up to multiples of 4. If you can imagine what kind of struggle that would be. My tics were also very debilitating at one point as well. In elementary school, I had a vocal tic where I would shout a random word as loud as I could every, 45 seconds. This tic became so severe that I had teachers telling me to cover my mouth and leave the room during class. This tic was at its worst when I was only 8 years old. So if you can, try and picture how furious you might be if your 8-year-old was kicked out of class for something they had absolutely no control over. I still suffer from some tics, mostly just facial contortions, due to long-term damage for being misdiagnosed and mistreated for years and years and years and years. I did not receive the correct diagnosis of pandas until I was 15. However, shortly after that diagnosis, I was lucky enough to be a part of a study on IVIG in pandas in Omaha, Nebraska. This treatment was absolutely life-changing and dramatically helped my condition. I come to you all with the hope that individuals in Kansas may be able to receive this treatment without having to carry the financial burden of doing so, because as stated previously, it's quite expensive. And while I was fortunate enough to be a part of the study, that is certainly not the case for the vast majority of kids with this condition. In light of that, I am asking the Kansas Senate to vote in favor of this pilot program. Although I believe that this disease has made me much stronger than the average person and has taught me the meaning of perseverance by forcing me to work my way through whatever's put in front of me, I would never wish anyone the same path it has forced me to walk. And though I've gone far beyond what is expected of me to reach full ride scholarship, National Merit Scholar, Kansas Governor's Award, and even a spot in a Division I marching band. Here, I go to Oklahoma State University now. But I don't think any other children in Kansas suffering from this disease should have to persevere as much as I have had to. By voting for the pilot plan, you are voting for the futures of thousands of kids in our great state. With that all being said, I will leave you all with one final question. What if your kid's story was my story? Thank you.
Mason, thank you very much for your testimony. We will now turn our attention to Andy Bongi? Got close.
Good morning, I'm Andy Bongi from Shawnee. Shout out to our fabulous KDOT workers because our trip in was not hazardous. Also, thank you for hearing our testimony today. The story of my family's history and my professional history as an occupational therapist working with children is really not of primary importance today. We'd be happy to talk to you about our personal experience later. But frankly, our personal experience is so difficult to talk about. It's difficult to hear about other people's experiences with it, that the only value I can put on the experience that we've been through and what I've seen the families that I work with go through is that we can keep other children from having to suffer the long-term effects of this disability, this disease. We've incurred over $120,000 in out-of-pocket expenses, and I can assure you we were also a very expensive family for our insurance company to cover because I received numerous emails from their management staff about how we could improve our family's lifestyle for better health outcomes. We put hours daily into research to find answers and treatment, which is not easy to do in our area. And the work we put into attempting to maintain a normalized family life for our children was difficult, but that's not what's important today. The stories of the families for whom I have unsuccessfully attempted to find treatment is not what's important today. Today, we come to you as parents and as professionals because of the children of Kansas whose families pay monthly premiums for health insurance, deserve accessible medical treatment. For an illness that was first described over 30 years ago in the medical literature. These children and their families deserve access to medical care for an illness that is largely not properly diagnosed and treated because physicians and health systems do not know that the appropriate medical care is reimbursable. These children and their families deserve relief from endless and costly in time, money, effort, and lost family opportunities for rounds of failed therapies, failed psychiatric medications, and minimally effective developmental services. And as an occupational therapist, I can tell you, it's like putting a Band-Aid on a punctured artery. These children and their families deserve medical coverage. Please support our request for a Senate bill to provide that state insurers covers the cost of this illness. Thank you.
Andy, thank you very much. Committee, let me turn your attention to, we have 10 pieces of written only testimony as proponents. I would also like to call your attention to a whole host of materials that Melissa sent out last night to each of our inboxes and also is posted online. Melissa, thank you for that work. We will now turn our attention to any questions for the proponents. Senator Fagg.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I say thank you to everyone that's given testimony here. It's quite eye-opening. I was wondering if the school systems are able to spot this kind of thing. I'd be interested in your.
Thank you. Again, I'm Andy Bongi from Shawnee. I'm a school-based occupational therapist since the year 2000. Yes, seasoned professionals. I would not have recognized this unless I had had a child on my own and had to research and find what the triggers were. And as an occupational therapist, I have no power to diagnose. And even though I can reach out to physicians in the community, it doesn't mean that my professional opinion is necessarily of any merit. And schools cannot diagnose anything. We cannot mention diagnoses unless they're educational diagnoses, because then the financial burden may be placed on the school district to solve the issue.
Senator Fagg.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I know if that issue's out there, and I think I've seen 1 in 200 number that was thrown around in there. I would envision you have a parent at home that doesn't know what's going on. You would think that the school system, I'm not saying we diagnose, but the possibility of it, you know, making sure that the school nurse or somebody's aware of that kind of thing, sure crosses my mind. That's kind of where I was going with that, because that's something we need to get the word out on if we don't.
Actually, I'm a school social worker. My name is Shannon, Wright. I'm a school social worker as well. And I have over 20 years experience working with children in different settings, residential, mental health centers, and I was not aware of this before it happened to my child. I just knew that this wasn't how mental illness looked, you know, and I knew our family system, and I knew we were a healthy system, and so that it shouldn't like just come upon a child suddenly. Sorry, I was going to address something about the schools, and now I've lost my train of thought. It is difficult. I think many of these children are not in school because they're not able to maintain in school. And so that is what my guess is. Now, in my daughter's case, we needed her to be in school because of, for us to financially pay for her medical care. We needed to both be working. And so they did, they had 2 paras and she was in her own office. I mean, it was really not maintainable for a school district to give that level of support indefinitely like that. But thankfully she did recover and we were able to find the appropriate treatment for her.
Thank you. Additional questions? Senator Kloos.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all for your testimonies. And it's just, it's home. And we have a young girl that works with our store, and I've actually had the opportunity to work with her. And this is definitely an area that has been overlooked, and we need to do what we can to get behind the parents and those that are walking through this time. Just a question and curiosity. It seems like I've met a lot of young girls that have gotten this disease. Is it more? Can you explain that a little bit, or is the ratio more for girls than boys, or does?
It's actually more common for boys in this document from the National Institute of Mental Health. It says the ratio below the age of 8 is 4.67 boys to every 1 girl, and above the age of 8, it's about 2.6 boys to 1 girl. So, you know, a big problem too is the misdiagnosis, that a lot of these kids are labeled as having psychiatric illness almost immediately and directed down that path. And one of the hallmarks of this condition is that they're extraordinarily sensitive to psychiatric medications. So if they're started on a normal dose, they may have even worsening of symptoms at that point, and it just continues to escalate from there. So it can be really difficult.
Thank you, Doctor. Additional questions?
So the diagnosis still seems to be a big issue then. at this point.
Education is a huge issue, yes, physician education. So this is a relatively new diagnosis in the scheme of things. It's well established. I think Dr. Sweeto first described it in the 1980s, but when you think about the time it takes to make that into a medical school curriculum and then residency and so on, it takes some time. And we're just now, getting a better understanding of this too.
Representative Eppley, do you have a comment?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. John Eppley, practicing family physician for 40 years and a member of the House. You just need to know that this diagnosis, while it's been around a long time, it only became an ICD-10 codable diagnosis about 3.5 years ago. And that's what really lends credibility to a diagnosis. Once it's in the code book, then we can say this has true credibility, and then we can start looking at algorithms on how to treat. And again, just for the committee's edification, not every one of those kids needs IgG. Certainly there's a good number that do, but oftentimes children will respond to, will respond to steroids or antibiotic cocktails first, and that will take care of the problem. So not every child needs IgG, and I think that's why our cost report came in as favorable as it was, and such that I think we can afford this going forward. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Eppley. Senator Dietrich, do you have a question or a comment?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can you hear me?
We can.
I'm sorry I couldn't be there today. I've known Shannon Wright and her family for a number of years. When I was in the House, she came into my office probably 5 years ago and educated me on PANS and PANDAS, and it was an area that I just knew very little about. And over the years, she has been such a strong advocate with other parents to bring this to our attention, both legislatively and medically, because it really was, I think, a two-pronged issue. We had physicians who really were not familiar with the diagnosis, and there was an issue with being able to find appropriate treatments in our state. And then as time has gone on, we're finally, I think, making some good progress. I'm very supportive of this, and I really want to thank Shannon and all of her hard work and her family's advocacy for this, as well as the other parents that are there today. It's really been quite a positive path, and I'm grateful to them. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Dietrich. Committee, we will now turn our attention to oral neutral testimony from Larry Ann Brown, State Government Affairs with Cigna. Welcome, Larry Ann.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. I am Larry Ann Brown. I'm here today to testify on behalf of Cigna. We're neutral on House Bill 2110. You have our written comments. First, I do want to commend the proponents who, with the guidance of Representative Eppley, followed the procedures that are laid out in statute that require a cost impact study be performed before consideration of any new health insurance mandate. The procedure, as Dr. Eppley has stated, was set in place. The legislature, so that they can have the data and the information that's needed to make a sound, fiscally responsible decision before mandating any additional health insurance mandates and cost onto the private health insurance market. And as I said, the proponents are following that procedure. So should this committee and the legislature decide to take the next step, which is included in this bill, and require that the state employees cover that benefit, I'm assuming the Appropriations and the Ways and Means Committee may want to appropriate the money necessary to provide the coverage, which according to the report, if you study it carefully, could be anywhere from $200,000 to a worst case scenario of $2 million. So just a few issues to keep in mind when you mandate a health insurance mandate. All of them always have compelling reasons and personal stories that make them good reasons to support them. They're all very difficult to say no to. I can tell you from my 27 years of experience testifying against them, it's not an easy job. But how do you say yes to one of them, such as this, and no to the others that come before you after this? As a representative of the health insurance industry, it's my job to do my best to make sure that you understand that every mandate that the legislature passes has that potential of raising cost for your constituents. Those are the individuals, small employers, some large employers, cities, counties, and school districts who purchase that health insurance and are already having trouble paying for that health insurance. Now, one mandate may not add up to much, but 4 or 5 can add up quickly, in turn increasing the cost of health insurance, which may increase the amount of people who may no longer be able to even afford any health insurance coverage at all. Robotics, nutritional formula, breast imaging, wigs for cancer patients, oral chemo, wheelchairs for children, hearing aids and other durable medical equipment. Those are just a few of the mandates that I've had to testify against. Kansas legislature has been very deliberate and careful in choosing which mandates to pass, as each one has some sort of fiscal note, whether it's large or small. We only ask that you do the same with this mandate. In addition, please remember that a health insurance mandate passed by the legislature doesn't affect self-insured ERISA plans. Farm Bureau, cost-sharing non-insurance plans such as health ministries. State mandates also don't apply to Medicaid, Medicare, short-term limited duration plans. In fact, a mandate that's passed by this committee and this legislature only affects about 30% of the market, which, as I stated earlier, are mostly those individuals and small group health insurance company plans. Finally, just keep in mind, under the ACA, the federal government requires health plans to cover the Essential Health Benefit Package, which is basically a standard health plan that includes coverage for 10 broad categories of services, limits cost sharing, and meets minimum actuarial standards for health insurance policies, that started after January 1st, 2014. The requirements apply to qualified health plans in the exchanges as well as health insurance plans offered in the small group and the individual markets outside of the exchanges. Should any state mandate coverage above the required benefits included as part of the Essential Health Benefit Package, the state may in fact be the ones that are required to pay for the increased cost associated with that mandate for those who purchase health insurance through the exchange. These costs will have to be picked up by the state and reported annually. It's just another reason the committee and the legislature should be very careful and give careful consideration before passing any new health insurance mandate, including this one. And thank you, and I'll be happy to stand for any questions.
Thank you, Larry Ann. Committee, are there questions? I see none. Thank you much.
Thank you.
Committee, we will now close the hearing on House Bill 2110. A quick review of the calendar shows that we will not meet tomorrow. We will not meet on Monday. Tuesday, we will have a hearing on KP&F buyback of service credits. And then Wednesday and Thursday, we will spend our time working the House bills that we've heard this week and last week. So, any other business before us? Thank you so much for coming in today. I know the weather is inclement and it's difficult to get here, and I really appreciate all of you being here today. Thank you, and we are adjourned.